Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone Season 5 Episode 15. It's called The Long Morrow. So spoilers for the episode as always. This one's about an astronaut who is going on a long 40-year journey to another solar system for science, for exploration, for all the usual reasons. But the episode focuses more on the fact that he's going to be going into cryosleep. The episode opens with him already in cryosleep on the ship, and then it sort of goes back and fills in kind of him finding out that he's going to have to do this, and some of the just kind of what he's signing up for with the cryosleep. That's really what it's about. The actual solar system he goes to, you never see that. You never see him land on a planet or anything like that. That's not what it's about, and that's fine. This is an interesting one because I think I really like the vibe of it, and that's a really hard thing to explain. Really, a vibe is a vibe. I mean, obviously, a lot of things accomplish that. Things like writing style, cinematography, set design, music. There's a lot of things that go into making a vibe, so it's hard to nail down specifically what that is sometimes. But it is definitely not a great episode. It's got some imperfections that really kind of stop it from going into the stratosphere. No pun intended. Honestly, I think this actually... I was saying last episode that the car episode last week, the one with the actress in her hometown the week before, were both solid, interesting episodes that were imperfect. So you couldn't love them as some of the greatest episodes ever, but they were a good watch, and I enjoyed thinking about them and talking about them, even if they weren't, everything they could have been. I think this episode makes it a trilogy. This kind of feels similar to me in that I love the concept of what it's playing with, even if the concept, is something that I've seen explored a lot in other science fiction in the decades since this, right? This is not obviously the first time I've encountered cryosleep. And I even got a little chuckle that when you see him in the cryosleep at the start, he's literally in what looks like a block of ice, right? it's taking it very, very much the literal, they're just going to freeze him kind of attitude. So it feels like an early interpretation of it. But I also really laughed at the date. It turns out this mission started in 1987, which obviously when they made this, that felt like, oh, that's over 20 years away. That feels like the future. But even if I'd watched this as a kid, that would have felt like an old date. So I thought that was a little amusing. But I like the exploration of the effects of going on this journey. The main thing being that he's going to be away for 40 years, and he thinks he's going to come back as a 70-plus-year-old. But the scientist then says, no, we've got a new experimental thing. We're going to put you into suspended animation, and barely no time will pass for you. You won't age beyond when you're awake, and you'll come back. The Earth will have changed, though. The Earth will have moved on, and you'll have to kind of start your life again when you come back. And that's kind of it. But then he immediately meets a woman and kind of falls in love, and that becomes kind of the big sticking point for... It never becomes a question of should I back out. He never does that. He never even theorizes or speculates or considers quitting the job and not going on the mission. He just kind of accepts it as a tragic thing he has to do now that he feels something for someone. I think the critiques that I would give the episode before I talk about any specific scenes is that every so often we cut to him lying in cryosleep and he'll sort of narrate his feelings. And honestly, I thought every single time it did this, he was just speaking gibberish. Like it was all just the most base level, like, oh, when you imagine a woman's face and your heart burns as bright as the sun and you can't take it any... Like, it's all just really crappy poetry. And I didn't really feel like it ever told me anything or really give me a sense of advancing the story. I get that it's a bit of flavour to show how deeply he's thinking about this person he's in love with as he's on this journey, but it didn't work for me, those parts, I will say. And interestingly, Rod did that thing again where he narrates the opening a little bit to explain what we're seeing and then does the proper introduction after we get a full sequence, which I guess is just what they're doing now. At least with this one, though, I will say that the concept, especially when this came out in like 1964, I have to imagine cryosleep as a concept probably did need some explaining. So I think I understand the need for it in this episode, at least, if that is the reason why they're doing this sort of double Rod intro kind of thing. But yeah, I think it was interesting to me watching this and seeing like the early scene where he goes and speaks to the scientist, and it does a good job, that scene, I think, of really giving you a sense of who both those characters are. The main character, the commander, Stansfield's the main character's name. He is always up for whatever he's been told. But he's also very kind of inquisitive. Anytime the scientist says something that's kind of like a question that you would maybe ask when you just meet someone for the first time, like I think one of the first things he says to him, "Oh, you've been an astronaut for 11 years." And instead of just going, "Yeah," Stansfield says, "Is that a question?" Like, really seriously, like, "Are you quizzing me?" And he's like, "It's an observation." And they have this almost, like, it's not even aggressive, because by the end of the scene, they're clearly both on the same page. They both think it's worth the trip, and he's excited about conquering this new final frontier, this new Mount Everest, and the scientist is all serious about it, but they clearly both are completely in agreement about what they're doing, but the way they speak to each other is so like they're on guard the whole time. And I thought that was kind of interesting, just from watching the conversation play out. It felt like there was some characters in the scene as opposed to just, oh, they're just explaining what's happening. Even if, arguably, I don't think it matters that much, it still made it feel like a more interesting conversation just because of that. The other critique that I would probably give it, though, is that I do think the scene where he meets the love of his life, Sandra, and he runs into her in the hallway at, they never say NASA, I think they just say science, the space program or whatever, but he meets her in the hallway, and honestly, they're meet cute, if you want to call it that, where he kind of flirts after she drops like a folder of like paper, and I thought it was weird that she sort of stares at it for like a good 10 seconds before she kneels down to start picking it up. Because you get what it's doing. He's going to help pick some of it up. And he's a gentleman. That's how they're going to start their interaction. That's fine. But everything felt kind of drawn out in a really weird way. But the bigger thing, though, is that he comes on very strongly, where he kind of shakes her hand and then he puts his other hand over the top and immediately starts kind of like asking her to dinner is fine, whatever, but he does it in this really kind of intense way where he's instantly fallen in love. And it felt just a little like, I think that if this scene was written to be a lot more natural, where I could really feel the chemistry, I think the entire concept of the episode would hit even harder, because I'd really buy into the person that he's leaving behind and the relationship that he's leaving behind. But as it is, like, I watched this scene kind of just been like, what is, so many little choices in how they performed this scene and the dialogue they gave them, particularly him, that just felt really weird to me. It popped back into my head, I just wanted to mention this, is that they mentioned that this guy's 31, and either they're lying, 31-year-olds looked older back then, which is probably true based on like just even if you look at stuff from the 80s. Like, if you the example I always bring up is that if you watch Cheers, when Fraser Crane first appears in that show, Kelsey Grammer was like 28 or something like that, and I swear I still look younger than he did in that show when he showed up. So it could just be that 31-year-olds looked older. Because we're going to see him be much older at the end of the episode, where he's like meant to be 70 plus, maybe the idea was to stretch it a bit so that they're not applying as much makeup, but the old age makeup's still not very good. That's a hard thing to get right. Most things don't. It feels a bit goofy, I think, most of the time when you see someone in old age makeup. So anyway, where's this all building to? There's I think the middle of the episode probably, like, I think introducing the concept, introducing what's going to have to happen, and this sort of like feeling that I'm leaving in 6 months and anything that I do doesn't really matter. So this relationship that I'm now in has a kind of a weird cloud hanging over it is a very cool vibe to me. It's very interesting. This idea of the sacrifice that he's making is all very good, but I do think some of his inner monologues about being in love with her, and then they're like one scene where they're dancing and whispering into each other's ears about how hard this is because they've only had such a short time together and he's going to have to leave, and that he can't wait. Like, the first thing he's going to do when he gets back, regardless of her age, is come and see her because he wants to see her, he wants to touch her, blah 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 blah. I think those scenes in the middle are probably the weakest in the episode for me. Just because the actual way they handle the relationship, like conceptually the relationship I like because of what it's doing for the whole idea of him giving up whatever he has to go on this trip. And when we get to the ending, all the things that happen because of some of the choices he makes about this romance, I like conceptually everything. The actual relationship itself and its execution just feels really kind of lazy. Not lazy, that's unfair. Stilted, awkward. Those are good words for it. But the big thing of the episode, the big ending where we get our twist, it's actually, I've never read Romeo and Juliet, but it's a little Romeo and Juliet from what I understand. Because spoilers for Romeo and Juliet, but I believe the ending of that story is that one of them fakes a suicide, and then the other one doesn't know they faked the suicide, they just think they're dead. So they actually commit suicide, and then the one that faked the suicide wakes up, sees the other one dead, and actually kills themselves. I could be wrong. I've never actually read or seen a performance of Romeo and Juliet. Somehow I managed to avoid that. They forced like 5 Shakespeare plays down my throat when I was in high school. Somehow that was never one of them. But this kind of gave me some vibes of that, because there's a sort of ironic, cruel thing that happens here, where we get like a good twist as the audience, because we cut ahead to present day, which actually we could probably work this out. I mean, they don't say it's exactly 40 years, they say it's been over 40 years, but he left in 1987, so 2027? We're coming up on it. This isn't quite as good. There was an episode of The X-Files in season 1, which I just wrapped up. But there was an episode in the middle of the season where they were talking about the next time someone's going to kill again, and they specifically said 2023, and of course it was 2023 when I was reviewing that episode, and I thought that was really wild. Coincidence, circumstantial, whatever, but fun. But anyway, so it's around 2027 or so, and we basically see some people at the space program say, hey, this old ship's coming back. This was one of the old ones. This was one of the first big long distance things that ever get sent out. And they're just discussing who was on the mission and anything to know about it. And there's some notes in the file from the scientist of the time, right, who we saw at the start of the episode, that basically said, when this ship is coming back, to go and find Sandra, to go find this woman, because she should be here to greet him. And the young guy's like, hey, well, where do we find her? Some old folks home? And the guy who's sort of in charge says, no, there's a note here saying that she's in one of the suspended animation facilities. The twist here, what we find out is that she made a choice, because she's in love with the main character, that she wanted to be the same age as she is when he left, when he comes back. So she, on Earth, just went into a cryosleep on her own. This was something that became available because it's a new technology. She did it seemingly as quickly as she could, and she's going to be roughly the same age, maybe a little older. I don't know how long it was until she got into the pod, but they wake her up, we see her, she's still 27 or whatever age they said she was, and it's like, oh, okay, this is going to be a big, heartwarming, sweet ending to the episode. But then we find out the guy who works at the space agency explains to her that for reasons they don't quite understand, although I think he does understand, but they didn't understand at the time, is that the main character, Stansfield, he wasn't actually in cryosleep the entire time on the journey. He chose to get out of cryosleep. I'm not sure how he did that, admittedly. There's a few little plot hole details in this story if you think about it a bit too hard. But that's okay. Like, I get what they're doing for the drama of the payoff here. But I guess maybe we have to just assume that he would be waking up every once in a while to just check on the ship and make sure that everything's working okay. And maybe even for his physical health, he has to get up every, couple months to do some exercise or something. I don't know. But regardless, he makes a choice to not go into the cryosleep after 6 months of the trip. So the ironic twist here is that he chose to age. He chose to stay awake and age for 40 years because he thought that he would be older than her when he got back. So because he was in love with her, he chose to stay awake so that he would also be in his 70s, or roughly the same age as she would be, when he came back. Only to find that she had chosen after he left to go into cryosleep so that she would still be young like him when he gets back. So now he's old and she's young, a flip of what we would have expected at the start of the story, and he's clearly heartbroken over it and asks her to leave. And it's, it's a sad downer of an ending. It's very, very ironic. They both made these heartfelt choices out of love, and I do like the overall idea of the twist here, and like I said, I like the vibe of the story in the episode. Like I critiqued a couple of things that didn't work for me in the middle. I will say that like I said, there's a few little plot hole things here that are a bit. I mean, one, as romantic as it is that he loved her so much that he chose to throw the majority of his life away to being alone on a spaceship, which I guess had enough food kicking about to live that long by himself. But he threw that all away, and all I could think as soon as they said this is that, but surely even before we got to the ending, even before the twist, what I was thinking when they were dancing and being all romantic and he was saying, I want to come back and see you, the first thought I had is that she's probably going to eventually move on and get married, have a family. She's probably going to have a whole life while he's away. And as much as it's great that she didn't do that, he didn't know she was going to go into the pod, of course. So if I was him and I was feeling all these romantic feelings, as much as I might think it's a good idea to stay awake and be her age when I get back, I think there's a good chance that she's probably going to have moved on. And even if I'm the same age, she's not going to want me anymore that way. I mean, she might still be affectionate towards me, but you've thrown away 40 years of your life for effectively no reason. And if he had been cautious like that and went into cryosleep like he should have done, then this would have all worked out. So that little detail that he was, I guess it's supposed to make it more romantic, that he's that hopeful, that he's that in love, that he believes that she will not only be still thinking about him in 40 years, that she'll still be single in her late 60s, early 70s, and they'll live whatever's left of their lives happily ever after. I guess that's what you're supposed to read from it, but part of me thinks that it's a little funny that if he had just been a little cautious and cynical about whether, the likelihood of her still being available that late on in her life after all that time, it would have all worked out for him, and he would have had the nice surprise that she's the same age. Because it is this really bitter ending where, I mean, before he tells her to leave, and not in an angry way, he just asks her to leave because it's hurting too much, effectively. He basically says, yeah, like, the thought of you is what kept me going these past 40 years. I fought to survive. The mental, like, gymnastics I had to do, it was you, the thought of you, the memory of coming to you that kept me going, and all of it was for this sick twist. What he was actually doing was throwing away the life that he could have with her. It's almost a kind of a mean twist in a lot of ways, because this isn't someone who's getting comeuppance. This is not someone who deserves this outcome. Neither of them deserve this outcome. As much as I didn't really buy into the romance, this is a particularly cruel twist. Maybe she couldn't have said before he left that I'm going to put her, if she'd said, hey, I'm going to go into cryosleep so that I'll be the same age when you get back, obviously that would solve everything, but maybe that wasn't an option until another 6 months or so. In fact, one of the details that comes up here at the end, before he enters the scene, is the guy at the space program explains to her that the irony of the progress that's been made in the last 40 years is that he didn't even need to go on the mission. Everything he discovered and has brought back with him, we already actually figured out about 20 years ago with different technology and different methods. So he went on this big long mission, but it was irrelevant by the time he actually made it back. Which is its own little interesting bit of irony as well. So I like a lot of the subjects that this episode's exploring. Like, I love the idea of the effect of cryosleep, of the world being different when you get back, and then the idea of tying that into romance and what you're willing to do to be with that person, especially if you're still committed to the mission that he is on. Like, all of those things I think are fascinating subjects, and I think a lot of this episode gets by because I'm genuinely interested in what it's talking about and what it's exploring. And the twist is, at the very least, engaging. Like, I didn't get to the twist and be like, oh, this is bullshit. It was actually a very interesting twist because you thought it gave you the happy twist, and then it turned the knife. It turned the knife and said, no. He made this choice already, and that's so. Like, some of the problems that I've brought up, like, I could suggest how to fix them. Some of them I'm not sure how to fix them without kind of restructuring the whole episode to kind of spend some time on different things. Probably take the monologuing when he's asleep out and put in more actual developing the romance. I think would probably be the choice I'd make. But yeah, but still an interesting episode. I'm certainly not mad at this one, and I like talking about it, I like thinking about it, and I enjoyed my 25 minutes watching it. So, yeah, long Morrow. It's certainly a solid watch, and I'm quite happy with it. So, next up on Twilight Zone, Rod came out and talked about someone trying to change who they are. That's really all he was getting at. He brought up the writer of this episode, and Jerry McNeely was the name he said. But here's the description on IMDb. The episode's called The Self-Improvement of Salvador Ross. Salvador Ross has a unique talent where he can trade physical characteristics with other people and will do anything to get the love of Leah Maitland. So, this is kind of touching on territory we had. Wasn't there an episode in like season 2 about someone who had 4 different faces? I feel like that was something we kind of did. I mean, I'm sure this will tackle it in a different way. And the themes might be very different, but the concept of someone being able to change their face was certainly something that came up in an early episode. And pretty early, season 1 or 2. It was quite a while ago. But yeah, curious. So yeah, we'll see what that is like next time. This has been my thoughts on this Twilight Zone. Thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. You can, of course, hit the like button. It's easy, it's free. Just click, and it helps out a bunch. And if you want to go above and beyond, you can support everything on the channel and the Male Fuzz Movies channel, which is where all the movie podcasts live, by going over to patreon.com/MaleFuzzTV and supporting over there and getting some bonuses for your trouble. But that is me. Thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.